A lot of the drama was about you and your dad and the conflicts.
Our show had drama?
A little bit, just a little bit.
What happens when a father and son build an empire, only to tear it apart in front of millions? This is the untold story behind the rise and fall of American Chopper. From blue-collar beginnings to explosive fame, family feuds, lawsuits, and silence that's lasted over 15 years, the truth runs deeper than reality TV ever showed. You've seen the bikes. Now it's time to hear what really happened behind the sparks, the shouting, and the silence. The rise of the empire. Every time the crew was in the workshop, it seemed like Vinny was deep into the job while Paul Jr. was being told to get more involved. His father, Paul Sr., often pushed him to stop supervising and start welding, grinding, and doing the hard work himself. That was the standard in their world. Everyone working, every bike getting done, no exceptions. For over 10 years, that was the reality behind the scenes at Orange County Choppers, a family-run business that would eventually grow into one of the most recognized custom motorcycle brands in the world. But that success didn't come without a cost. It was built on years of intense labor, creative vision, and a family dynamic that, while passionate, was also full of tension. Before the TV cameras arrived and the world saw their story unfold, Paul Jr. was simply a young man trying to prove himself in his father's world. And even then, the path wasn't smooth. Paul Jr.'s story doesn't begin with fame or money. It begins with work. Most kids in the 1980s were riding bikes, playing video games, or hanging out with friends during summer. But Paul was different. From as young as 12, he was working at Orange County Iron Works, the family's original business. Instead of holidays, he spent his time in a hot, noisy workshop, cleaning up metal shavings, moving tools, and learning how the trade worked from the ground up. Even before that, Paul Jr. was fascinated by the materials around him. He used to collect discarded metal scraps from his father's job sites and build small sculptures out of them. While other kids saw junk, he saw potential. That way of thinking stayed with him. By the time he was 14, he was already welding, and not just as a beginner. He worked with a level of calm and precision that even older tradesmen respected. He wasn't just following instructions. He was developing a mindset and skill set that would define his future career. Of course, working in the family business also came with high expectations. Paul Sr. had a reputation for being tough. He didn't let things slide, especially not for his son. Paul Jr. was often held to a higher standard. If something went wrong, he'd get called out in front of everyone. To outsiders, it might have looked harsh, even unfair. But in the shop, it was seen as part of growing up, a lesson in resilience and professionalism. As time went on, the differences between father and son started to show. Paul Sr. was rooted in old-school methods, relying on physical strength and traditional approaches. Paul Jr., on the other hand, had an eye for design. He was drawn to clean lines, balanced proportions, and creative solutions. At one point, he redesigned a metal railing to make it both stronger and more visually appealing. His father dismissed it at first, but a few days later, without a word, he approved and used it. That silent approval said a lot. While they clashed often, there was always a level of mutual respect under the surface. During his time in high school, Paul Jr. made a decision that would shape his future. Rather than following a conventional academic route, he joined a vocational program. This allowed him to split his day between regular school and hands-on technical training. He studied welding, metalwork, and blueprint reading. One of his instructors later said that Paul had a rare gift. He could almost see how metal would move before touching it. That natural intuition gave him an edge, but he didn't rely on talent alone. He put in the hours, practicing every technique until it became second nature. By the time he returned to the family shop after graduation, Paul Jr. wasn't just a helper anymore. He had become a skilled tradesman. At just 19 years old, he was given the lead role in the shop's railing division. This wasn't a symbolic promotion or a favor. The railing business was a major part of Orange County Iron Works' income, and putting someone young in charge came with risk. But he proved himself quickly. Paul introduced new designs that appealed to customers who were willing to pay more and wait longer for his custom work. He also managed a crew of experienced, often older workers, many of whom were hesitant at first, but eventually came to respect his leadership. Despite the success, Paul Jr. began to feel creatively limited. Designing and fabricating railings and staircases was steady work, but it didn't excite him the way building something more dynamic might. Quietly, he started sketching motorcycle designs in a notebook. It was a passion he shared with his father, who around that time had also started thinking about bikes again. What started as a hobby quickly turned into something more serious. Paul Sr. saw one of his son's sketches and was surprised. It wasn't just functional, it was artistic. That moment was a turning point. Instead of brushing it off, Paul Sr. said the words that would launch a new chapter for the family. Let's build bikes for real. With $175,000 gathered from the ironworks business, they launched Orange County Choppers. But it wasn't an equal partnership. Paul Sr. kept 80% of the business. Paul Jr. held the remaining 20%. At the time, it didn't matter. They had very little, just a cold basement, a few tools, and a shared ambition. Their first bike, called True Blue, took 4 months to complete. It featured a deep blue paint job with white flames, and the craftsmanship surprised everyone who saw it. When they took it to Daytona in 1999, the reaction was overwhelming. People in the custom motorcycle scene took notice. Their shop, once quiet and modest, began to attract attention. But the road ahead wasn't easy. In the early days, they operated in a small, freezing workshop. Tools constantly broke down. Suppliers demanded cash up front. Money was tight, and long hours became the norm. Paul Jr. was often sleeping on a couch in the workshop, working 18-hour days just to meet deadlines. The stress levels were high, and the arguments between father and son were frequent and intense. These weren't staged for anyone's entertainment. They were part of the survival process. Despite everything, they kept going. The bikes they produced gradually gained more attention, and the business began to grow. Then, in 2002, a phone call changed everything. A television producer named Craig Pelagian had read about their work in a magazine. He called Orange County Choppers, pitching an idea for a reality show. When Paul Sr. picked up the phone and heard the pitch, his first response was blunt. "What the hell do you want?" The idea, a show about restoring junkyard bikes, didn't interest him. They built bikes from scratch, and that's what he wanted people to see. The initial deal fell through, but the producer returned weeks later with a revised concept, a series showing their real process, arguments and all. Paul Jr. was against it. He wrote his father a 5-page letter explaining why he thought it was a bad idea. He was worried the cameras would distort everything and turn their work into a circus. But they needed the money, and in the end, they signed the contract. When American Chopper premiered on March 31, 2003, it became an unexpected hit. Within 3 episodes, millions were tuning in every week. The shop turned into a tourist attraction. Merchandise began selling out. Discovery Channel made over $13 million in the first season. What had started as a family project in a cold garage was now a full-blown media franchise. At first, viewers were drawn in by Paul Sr.'s fiery temper, but it was Paul Jr.'s quiet skill that kept them watching. His ability to visualize and fabricate intricate motorcycle designs set him apart. One memorable scene, just him, a welding torch, and a gas tank, became one of the most requested clips from the show. It was real, raw craftsmanship on display. And suddenly, welding schools across the country started seeing a rise in enrollment. They called it the Pauly effect. The fame, friction, and fallout. The early years of the show saw a steady rise in both viewership and tension. The dynamic that had once powered the shop, Paul Sr.'s discipline and Paul Jr.'s creativity, began to turn into a source of constant conflict. Cameras captured some of it, but much of the real emotion and stress happened when the lights were off. Their arguments became more personal. What used to be small disagreements about bike design or deadlines became full-blown shouting matches, often in front of staff. It wasn't for drama. It was real. Paul Sr. was the kind of leader who believed in doing things his way, and he expected everyone else to fall in line. He had built Orange County choppers from nothing and had no intention of giving up control. Paul Jr., however, had started to become a public figure in his own right. Fans loved his designs. Media outlets wanted to talk to him, not just his father. That shift in attention created a growing imbalance. While Sr. still ran the business, it was becoming clearer that Jr. was the creative heart of the brand. In 2007, Paul Sr. officially gave his son a 20% stake in the company. On paper, it looked like a solid move, father and son working together as partners. But in practice, it changed very little. Sr. still had the final say in all decisions, and Jr., despite his growing popularity and design influence, didn't have much room to operate independently. That imbalance began to build resentment. As Jr. became more known for his artistic vision, Sr. felt his role as the founder and original builder was being overshadowed. The working environment became increasingly volatile. Staff members began to notice the growing tension. Designers like Jason Pohl were caught in the crossfire. One infamous incident saw Jason destroy his own creation in frustration after a particularly intense encounter with Paul Sr. Even Mikey, the youngest of the Turtles, and often the comic relief on the show, began to feel the emotional weight of the situation. His usual lighthearted personality couldn't mask the toll the constant fighting was taking. By 2008, the shop was no longer just a workplace. It had turned into a battleground. Arguments between Paul Sr. and Jr. weren't occasional. They were daily. Most of the fights boiled down to control. Jr. wanted more freedom to design and run his own projects. Sr. wanted discipline, structure, and loyalty. The cameras often caught the surface-level conflict, but what was happening behind closed doors was far more intense. Staff members walked on eggshells. The pressure to keep building, keep filming, and keep performing was immense. Then came the breaking point. In September 2008, Paul Jr. was late to work, something that had happened before, but this time it triggered a chain reaction. Paul Sr. snapped. What could have been a simple warning turned into an explosive confrontation. The fight escalated quickly, and in front of the entire crew, Paul Jr. defended himself, pointing out that no matter what, he always delivered. Sr. wasn't interested in explanations. He saw it as disrespect. In a moment of rage, Jr. threw a chair across the office, followed by a trash can. He then kicked a door open and stormed out. Paul Sr. chased after him, and in the heat of the moment, fired him on the spot. That chair-throwing moment would later become a meme, replayed countless times on the internet and in reality TV highlight reels. But at the time, it wasn't funny. It was a complete breakdown of a family and a business partnership. The fallout was immediate. The shop was divided. Some of the team supported Jr., believing he was the driving force behind the company's best work. Others stayed quiet, worried about losing their jobs or facing Sr.'s anger. Customers began to worry too. With the designer behind some of their most famous bikes gone, would Orange County choppers still deliver the same quality? Behind the scenes, things got worse. TLC, the network airing the show at the time, reminded Paul Jr. that he was still under contract. Walking away from filming could have legal consequences. For a short while, he returned as an independent contractor, but it was clear the relationship was broken. By April 2009, he was completely out. Paul Sr. wasn't content with just pushing his son out of the company. He wanted him out for good. That's when he tried to buy back Jr.'s 20% stake in Orange County choppers. When Jr. refused to sell, Sr. filed a lawsuit. The legal battle wasn't just about money, it was about power. Sr. argued that he had the right to buy back the shares for $500,000. Then, in a further move, he added another lawsuit, demanding an additional $1 million in damages. Strangely, he also made the company itself a co-defendant, putting Orange County choppers on both sides of the legal battle. It was a strategy designed to squeeze Paul Jr. out entirely. The heart of the legal fight was a clause in the original agreement that said Sr. could buy out Jr.'s shares at fair market value. But the contract didn't define what that meant. The vague wording turned into a major issue. The case went to the New York Supreme Court in 2010. Initially, the judge sided with Senior, ruling that the clause was enforceable and that an outside appraiser would determine the value of the shares. For a while, it looked like Junior had lost everything. In court, the two men sat just feet from each other but never spoke. The silence between them said more than any testimony. But then, in December 2010, the appellate court reversed the ruling. They declared the clause too vague to enforce. That meant Junior kept his 20% stake in Orange County Choppers. It was a legal victory, and a personal one. Against the odds, the son who had been fired and sued was still standing, and his father couldn't force him out. Even with the court win, Paul Jr. was restricted by a one-year non-compete clause. He couldn't build motorcycles until 2010. So he pivoted. During that time, he explored other design projects, including a camping grill for Coleman and public park installations. It was a tough period, but he kept pushing forward. He and his wife Rachel converted a room in their home into an office and hired a young assistant to help with computer work. As soon as the non-compete ended in April 2010, he made a bold move. He opened his own shop, Paul Jr. Designs, right across the street from Orange County Choppers. And he didn't do it alone. Key figures from OCC followed him. Vinny DiMartino, Joe Pugliafico, Nub Collard, and even Mikey walked away from the company to join him. Not long after, Cody Connolly joined the team as well. It wasn't just a new business, it was a quiet rebellion. Discovery Channel saw an opportunity. They greenlit a new show called Senior vs. Junior, debuting in August 2010. It pitted the two shops and the two men against each other. The idea was simple. Watch father and son build bikes, compete for clients, and clash over their very different styles. But what made for compelling television came at a personal cost. The show didn't heal the rift, it widened it. While Paul Sr. leaned into the dramatic tension for ratings, Paul Jr. had his doubts. He had already seen what reality TV could do to personal relationships. Still, the cameras rolled. Audiences were encouraged to take sides. Viewers who once tuned in to see bikes were now watching a very public family feud. Critics called it tantrum TV, and it lived up to the name. But beneath the theatrics was a real story of estrangement, pride, and heartbreak. The rivalry, reinvention, and reflection. The new series, Senior vs. Junior, broadcast that tension for all to see. It wasn't a subtle rivalry. It was a structured competition, filmed week after week, and edited to highlight every flare-up, every design challenge, and every emotional fallout. Each episode gave viewers a closer look into how different the two men had become. While Paul Sr. stuck to the rough, industrial style that had defined OCC's earlier bikes, Paul Jr. leaned into artistry. His bikes had a cleaner, more refined look, with sharp attention to detail and symbolic design choices that went beyond just looking good. The contrast between the two approaches wasn't just aesthetic, it represented a deeper philosophical divide. Paul Sr. believed in toughness, speed, and tradition. Paul Jr. believed in purpose, creativity, and technical precision. The show took full advantage of that difference, often placing them in parallel builds to heighten the contrast. Fans and critics took sides. Online discussions, forums, and social media were filled with debates over whose bike designs were better and whose leadership style made more sense. But while the cameras captured the competitive spirit, something else was happening off-screen that would have a lasting impact on Paul Jr.'s life. During one of the episodes, he met Rachel Beast, who appeared on set as part of a promotional shoot. She stood out, not just because of her appearance, but because of her calm, grounded personality. Paul Jr., who was in the middle of lawsuits, a new business launch, and a messy family dynamic, found something solid in her. What started as a lighthearted meeting quickly became a serious relationship. Rachel wasn't just supportive, she was independent. She had her own business, her own goals, and wasn't tied to the chaos of the Teutul family brand. Over time, she became an anchor in Paul Jr.'s life. As things got more complicated professionally, she helped bring clarity to his personal world. Their relationship grew, and in August 2010, the couple got married. The wedding was grand, featuring a custom cake from Cake Boss and a gathering of over 100 friends and family members. But there was one notable absence: Paul Sr. Despite being invited, he didn't attend. The legal battles and emotional distance were still too raw. That empty chair at the ceremony symbolized more than just a missed moment. It represented the emotional gap that had opened between father and son. Paul Jr. admitted later that the absence hurt. Even on one of the most important days of his life, the rift between them couldn't be ignored. As newlyweds, Paul Jr. and Rachel made a decision that surprised many people, especially given the public nature of their lives. After attending a spiritual retreat together, they committed to deepening their faith. That included a choice to live with renewed values, including no intimacy before marriage, a decision they both agreed on and later spoke openly about. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture. For Paul Jr., it marked the beginning of a personal transformation that would influence how he approached business, family, and even the legacy of the Teutul name. That same year, he and Rachel began trying to have a child. The journey wasn't easy. After nearly 2 years of trying and several setbacks, it finally happened. Not in New York, where they had undergone fertility treatments, but during a spontaneous trip to Nashville. In 2015, their son Hudson was born. The experience of becoming a father had a profound impact on Paul Jr. Holding his son for the first time changed how he viewed his own father. For the first time, he said he truly began to understand what it meant to be a parent, including the fears, pressures, and mistakes that can come with it. That shift in perspective didn't erase the past, but it did open the door to healing. Paul Jr. began reflecting more deeply on his childhood, the way he was raised, and how much of it shaped the man he had become, for better or worse. He didn't excuse the yelling, the control, or the emotional distance, but he started to see it in a new light. Through his faith, he found forgiveness, not just for his father, but also for himself. Professionally, Paul Jr. continued to grow. His shop, Paul Jr. Designs, were becoming more than just a new version of OCC. It was evolving into a full-fledged design and engineering business with a focus on both form and function. His bikes weren't just being featured in magazines, they were winning awards and being commissioned by major companies for large-scale campaigns. In 2012, Paul Jr. introduced a new design technique that would become a game-changer in the custom motorcycle world. Using a process known as T-spline modeling, he found a way to create smooth, organic shapes more quickly and accurately than traditional methods allowed. What used to take 40 hours of hands-on shaping could now be done in about 15. The move wasn't just about efficiency. It showed how much he had grown as both an artist and a technical designer. That same year, he worked on an electric bike concept in collaboration with Autodesk, the software company. The project pushed the boundaries of what custom bikes could be. It combined old-school craftsmanship with cutting-edge technology, something very few builders at the time were even attempting. Other shops soon started adopting similar methods, often without realizing that Paul Jr. had helped pioneer the approach. In 2015, he made another leap forward, introducing a lightweight motorcycle frame design that reduced the overall weight of custom builds without sacrificing strength or safety. Again, this wasn't just a creative idea, it was a highly technical innovation. He even taught himself how to write G-code, the programming language used to operate CNC machines, so he could control the manufacturing process directly. The guy who used to sweep floors was now designing, programming, and overseeing every step of production. By this point, it was clear that Paul Jr. had outgrown the image of a hot-headed son in his father's shadow. He had become a well-rounded designer, entrepreneur, and engineer in his own right, and his business reflected that growth. He started working with global companies like Blizzard Entertainment, Paramount Pictures, and Razer. His bikes were appearing in commercials, gaming conventions, and Hollywood promotions. The name Paul Jr. Designs wasn't just known among bike fans, it was becoming a respected brand in product design and innovation. From 2010 to 2016, he and his father crossed paths several times in televised competitions and joint appearances. While the surface-level tension made for good ratings, underneath it all, the pain was still real. In 7 major televised build-offs, Paul Jr. won 5. Each time, his bikes stood out for their creativity, storytelling, and visual impact. His designs weren't just machines, they were statements, each with a theme, a message, and emotional weight. One of the most talked about examples was a bike inspired by the P-51 Mustang, a World War II fighter plane. It combined historical elements with sleek, modern finishes and served as a tribute to veterans. It was a reminder of what set him apart. Paul Jr. didn't just build for function, he built for meaning. Even during the height of the rivalry, Paul Jr. rarely resorted to public insults. He stayed focused on his work and his personal growth. That restraint, especially in the context of reality TV, helped build a different kind of respect among fans and peers. He wasn't perfect, but he was evolving, and people noticed. By the middle of the decade, Paul Jr. designs outperformed Orange County choppers in terms of brand growth and cultural relevance. His clothing line was turning a steady profit. His bikes were commanding higher prices. And his reputation as a builder was no longer tied to his last name. It was tied to his work. But while the business was booming, the personal rift remained. The distance between father and son, though less explosive, was still very real. They could appear on the same show, shake hands, even smile for a photo. But the deeper relationship, the one that had cracked years earlier, hadn't fully healed. The reunions, resentments, and revelation. One of the few things that ever pulled them back into the same space was tragedy. In December 2011, the death of Paul Sr.'s mother, Paul Jr.'s grandmother, created a moment that broke the silence. For nearly 2 years, the two hadn't spoken a word. But in the wake of her passing, Paul Jr. made a phone call. It wasn't long or dramatic, just a simple message of sympathy. He told his father that she had loved him very much and that he was sorry for the loss. On the other end of the line, Paul Sr. didn't know how to respond. He later admitted that he wished the conversation had happened in person. That brief exchange didn't rebuild the relationship, but it showed there was still a trace of connection under the layers of conflict. 6 years after the phone call, in 2018, the public saw what appeared to be a major reunion between father and son. However, this wasn't a family breakthrough. It was a business decision. Discovery Channel had proposed a special episode to bring the two Teutul's back together, not for emotional reconciliation, but to repair one of their most iconic creations, the Yankees-themed chopper they had originally built in 2005. The bike had been sold, damaged, and then found again, giving the producers the perfect excuse to pitch a televised repair project that would reunite the Teutul's on screen. Behind the scenes, though, the situation was tense. The production team implemented separate shooting schedules, strict filming protocols, and even backup plans in case arguments got out of hand. It was clear this wasn't a casual family get-together. Paul Sr. publicly said they were older and wiser, suggesting the past was behind them, but those who worked on the shoot said otherwise. The tension was visible, and old patterns quickly began to resurface. 2 years later, the network aired what they called The Last Ride, a 2-hour special that aimed to bring closure to their story. The bike they were building was meant to be a tribute, patriotic, honoring family values, and representing a potential moment of healing. But from the first day of filming, it became obvious that little had changed. Paul Sr. dismissed his son's ideas, often interrupting or ignoring him completely. Crew members reported a heavy atmosphere, with everyone trying to navigate around the underlying tension. At the same time, the original Orange County Choppers headquarters, the very building where their empire began, was being torn down in the background. It was an eerie and symbolic moment. While the Teutul's were attempting to complete one final joint project, the physical foundation of their shared history was being demolished. For many fans, it was a painful thing to watch. Online, Hashtags like Respect Paul Jr. started trending as viewers took issue with Paul Sr.'s cold behavior and dismissiveness. Paul Jr. later said that there were only a few moments during filming when he actually felt good, and those were the times when he and his father worked side by side without any cameras, quietly focused on building. It reminded him of the early days before fame, lawsuits, and TV contracts had reshaped everything. But those quiet moments were brief and fleeting. When the bike was completed, Paul Sr. admitted bluntly that he hadn't wanted to do the project and that it hadn't improved their relationship at all. Despite the hopeful title, The Last Ride didn't resolve anything. In fact, it confirmed what many had already suspected, that the damage done over the years was likely permanent. Even with a shared business legacy, a long-running television show, and decades of memories, the two men were no closer to being family in any meaningful sense. As of 2025, they continue to live entirely separate lives. They do not share holidays, birthdays, or even routine conversations. Paul Jr. confirmed in a recent podcast that he and his father haven't shared a holiday meal in more than 15 years, not even after the birth of his son. When they do communicate, it's usually for business reasons or network obligations. They've accepted this new normal, even if it feels unfinished. Their companies reflect that divide. Paul Sr. still runs what remains of Orange County Choppers. Meanwhile, Paul Jr. has expanded Paul Jr. Designs into a $14 million brand. It's no longer just about bikes. His business includes apparel, licensing deals, product design, and custom fabrication. He's built a team, a brand, and a reputation that stands apart from the family name. While Orange County Choppers holds a nostalgic place in American pop culture, Paul Jr. Designs have found its own audience in a different world, one built on innovation and precision rather than reality TV drama. In February 2025, Paul Jr. made a surprise announcement. He will be releasing a new memoir in October. Titled, Given the Opportunity, it promises to be his most personal project to date. According to early reports, this book won't be a polished, PR-friendly look at his career. It's expected to be raw, detailed, and honest about the family conflict that defines so much of his adult life. Insiders close to the project have said the book will cover several incidents that were either cut from the American Chopper series or never filmed at all. One of those is reportedly a 2008 confrontation between father and son that nearly turned physical, something that was kept out of the public eye at the time. Other chapters are said to touch on the emotional toll of being shouted down in front of coworkers, the mental strain of years under camera scrutiny, and his father's long-standing battle with alcoholism, a subject that has rarely been addressed in public. Paul Jr. has said in interviews that he isn't sharing these stories to stir up drama or reopen wounds. He believes that being open about the pain and dysfunction might actually help other people who've lived through difficult family relationships. The goal, he says, isn't revenge, it's reflection. In some ways, this upcoming memoir is the final step in a journey that started long before the cameras ever arrived. Paul Jr. began as a young apprentice in a tough, high-pressure environment. He spent years trying to gain his father's approval, then years fighting for his independence. He built a name, lost it, rebuilt it, and found a new identity on his own terms. The book, like the bikes he spent decades designing, is a product of both his past and his evolution.